We have playoff football and we have dynasty football going on at the same time. It is a great day to be a fan of the NFL. Today, we're going to take these dynasty running backs and put them into our tier rankings. But before we do that, quick Ty, I want to ask you, who do you think is going to be the surprise of the week in the NFL? If you had to pick one of these underdogs during wild card weekend, who do you think is going to surprise some people this weekend?
See, I feel like a lot of people would say it's Washington, but I'm pretty sure Washington's actually favored against Tampa, which is weird to me. I'm like, Tampa is sneaky good. I think we're underrating Tampa just a bit, but if I'm completely honest, give me Denver over Buffalo.
Really?
Just because I think that Denver defense poses some mismatches and some difficulties for the Buffalo offense. I think I'm not saying that Denver's going to win outright, but I think I'm expecting like a 20-17 kind of game-winning field goal from Buffalo kind of game, where like Denver actually could be winning for most of the game, and then Buffalo like squeezes out 10 points in the last like 8 minutes of the game, and they come away with the W.
Yeah, I think Tampa blows out Washington. That's my surprise. I think they win by multiple touchdowns. That is my surprise. I think that they just roll over Washington in this one. Could be wrong. Could both be wrong, but it should be a fun wild card weekend.
I need to clarify. Tampa is now favored by 3. So,
Washington's still the underdog, but I do think the surprise is going to be how big Tampa wins by in this one. That's what I'm going to say. I think they're going to bounce back and win big. Well, let's get into why you came, and that's for your dynasty running backs. We're going to start in the S tier, and there's only 2 guys, as you can see, in the S tier. It's Bijan Robinson and Jahmyr Gibbs. And what it comes down to is they were the running back 2 and 3 in fantasy points per game this last season. They were great prospects coming to the NFL. Both are only 22 years of age right now. Ty, if you had to pick one between the two, who are you taking in Dynasty, Bijan Robinson or Jahmyr Gibbs?
Probably Bijan Robinson. I think the only reason why is because Jahmyr Gibbs has a David Montgomery problem. And problem sounds extreme, but Jahmyr Gibbs has the most contingent upside of any fantasy football player, right? Because we saw it happen in the last 4 weeks of the season where David Montgomery goes down, Jahmyr Gibbs finishes as the running back 1 overall, probably the most important factor in a championship run for your team, right? 2 running back 2 finishes, 1 running back 1 overall finish, right? Because again, we had to score 4 touchdowns against Minnesota. Not mad. We're moving on. But with David Montgomery, that ceiling, while it's still a very good ceiling, is not the same without David Montgomery versus Bijan Robinson. You have to think that moving forward, that everything is going to build off of the run game with Bijan Robinson in Atlanta, right? Take some pressure off of Michael Penix, even though he did show some flashes. They're going to rely on Bijan to do a lot of the hard work in that offense to get them down the field. And with his receiving upside too, even though it's not elite like a Jahmyr Gibbs' level, it's still enough to make a difference.
Yeah, I mean, you talked about Gibbs over the last 4 weeks, averaged 31.5 fantasy points per game from week 15 to week 18. Without David Montgomery, puts up over 600 total yards, 8 touchdowns during that stretch. Obviously, very little bit of a different story. Still very good when Monty is in there, but he doesn't. We don't have that worry about Bijan Robinson. Bijan Robinson had 300 attempts, 61 carries this season. He has consistent volume no matter what. Whereas, Gibbs, I think I heard the stat. I'm just going to double check that here. Yeah, not a single game in PPR formats with under 10 fantasy points.
Yeah.
Impressive. I mean, right? He never killed you on a week. Never, you never regretted putting him in your lineup. So that is a big plus. But that is why both of them are in the S tier. The A tier, we start to get, a little more interesting. De'Von Achane, Breece Hall, Saquon Barkley. The only reason Saquon Barkley's in this A tier instead of the S tier is just he's a 27-year-old running back. And I know we've seen, this season, Derrick Henry, Kamara, Joe Mixon, right? These guys where we talk about this 28-year-old age cliff, they're still progressing. But when you're talking about a 5-year difference between Bijan Robinson and Jahmyr Gibbs and Saquon Barkley with the same production, that's just where the gap or the divide happens. We still expect Saquon to be great. That's why he's in this tier. But he does drop down. De'Von Achane, finishes the running back 5 on the season, 17.6 fantasy PPR fantasy points per game. Breece Hall, a little more disappointing at the running back 16 with only 15.1 fantasy points per game. Ty, I want to talk about Breece Hall a little bit because he felt like coming into the season was probably the running back 1 overall, or in the discussion between him and Bijan Robinson, has kind of fallen from grace a little bit. Do we expect a bounce back, or is what we saw this season kind of what we're going to get from Breece Hall moving forward?
I have to think that we're going to bounce back a little bit next year, just because like this season for the Jets was just chaotic, right? Robert Saleh fired, Joe Douglas fired, Aaron Rodgers not living up to Aaron Rodgers football, what you would expect from Aaron Rodgers. For whatever reason, the Jets wanted, I take that all back. We were saying it at the beginning of the year. The floor is scary. For me, it was scarier than a Bijan Robinson going into the year because his play caller was Nathaniel Hackett, right? We knew that, okay, you've put playmakers for Nathaniel Hackett on the Jets, but there's no guarantee that it's actually going to work out. And sure enough, it didn't, because he got canned and then Todd Downing took over. And for Breece Hall, I have to think that moving forward, he is going to be the piece in this offense that has to get going. Yes, you've got a stud in Garrett Wilson, and he'll get his in the passing game. But if you want your offense to really do anything next year, you have to go through Breece Hall, because he is just that dynamic of a rusher, right? The scary part is the coaching situation. If they don't get the coach right and they don't get the offensive, whoever the play caller is, if they don't even get the play caller right, I don't want to say all hope is lost, but we're in for another frustrating year or two, as forever, however long that play caller is in town for. So again, you and I both are expecting a bounce back from Breece Hall, but there is still a lot that needs to be done right to make us feel rock solid in having Breece Hall as a top 5 dynasty running back.
Yeah, I mean, a big part of it too, just touchdowns, end zone opportunities for Breece Hall. We saw Bijan with 15 this year, Gibbs scoring over 20. Breece Hall had 5 rushing touchdowns and 3 receiving touchdowns. He's just not getting those end zone opportunities. Part of that, Braylon Allen, much more involved than I think we thought he was going to be to start the season. But yeah, Breece Hall only 209 attempts on the year, 100 less than Bijan had. He had only 57 receptions compared to 76 last year. So, and then he was averaging only 4.2 yards per attempt. So you would love to see all those come back. We still believe in the talent of Breece Hall. We still believe in the role that he's going to have. It's just kind of how is it all going to look, finishing up for next year. Like I said, we talk about Saquon just really briefly. Is there really anything holding you back on Saquon in Dynasty other than him just being 27 years old? Like, I think, a little regression next year. Obviously he's probably not going to hit 2,000 yards, and 2 seasons in a row, 15 touchdowns, is kind of a maybe. But it's not like he had outlandish receiving numbers or anything like that. It's just, I think the yards can come back a little bit. But even if they come back to earth, he's probably still a top 5 back in fantasy football next season.
Oh, absolutely. Because the touchdown upside will forever and always be there, right? Because this Philly offense, let's be honest, they are designed to score, right? So Saquon Barkley easily has 15 touchdowns a year upside in Philadelphia. Like you said, I don't think we're going to see 5.8 yards per carry again. I don't think we're going to see nearly 350 carries again from Saquon Barkley. But even if we're going to get 300 carries or 280 carries or something like that, that Saquon's going to be productive with those. So there is nothing holding me back when it comes to Saquon Barkley in Dynasty, just other than his age. Because 27, we are kind of approaching that kind of, maybe we need to say this though too, because age cliffs are different for every single running back, right? For an elite talent like Saquon Barkley, I think it's okay to not worry about an age cliff. But like you said at the very top, when you're 5 years older than the S tier running backs, it does make a difference.
Yep, no, 100%. And that's just where the divide happens. Then De'Von Achane, who's a very interesting piece right now, kind of feels like he's becoming the Alvin Kamara that we've been used to. The receiving work has just been ridiculous. 87 targets, 78 receptions, 592 receiving yards, and 6 receiving touchdowns. And then on the ground, 203 rush attempts for 970 yards, and another 6 touchdowns there. The issue this year obviously was Tua missing time. When Tua was out, he was significantly worse than when Tua was in. When Tua was in, the receiving game just was 8 targets, 5, 4, 4, 9, 7, 7, 7, 7. I mean, just outlandish numbers, catching the ball, 7 and 7 receptions in the first 2 games of the season. Do you think De'Von Achane could slide into that S tier? And what do you think would take for that to happen? Or do you think he's going to kind of be an A tier type of guy?
No, I think I was kind of debating this to myself when we were going through making our rankings, was like, there's a case for Achane being an S tier running back. I think the problem that I ran into was just his floor is way lower than a Jahmyr Gibbs and Bijan Robinson if Tua goes down, right? To the point where, again, earlier this year against Seattle, Tennessee, and New England, when Tyler Huntley was playing, you had to keep playing Achane, but it was not great. I mean, 8.8, 5.9, 2.7. Like it was not good, right? So because of that floor and that potential with Tua missing time into the future, that's what puts him down in the A tier for me. But there's certainly a case to put him in the S tier because you know when Tua is healthy, Achane's a top 3 back in fantasy.
Yeah. Yeah. From week 7 to 17, he was averaging 19.3 fantasy points per game, which is still almost 2.5 full points behind Bijan Robinson and Jahmyr Gibbs. So that for me is what kind of keeps him apart. It's not that he's, not worthy of, moving up. It's just these other 2 guys have been so ridiculously good this year that I think it does keep them apart. All right, let's move on to the B tier. It is funny kind of calling it the B tier because you look at the names of the B tier, like these aren't B running back. No, it's just, that's just the ordering we're using. So I don't want you to hear what we're not saying, right? We're not calling Kyren Williams, Jonathan Taylor, Josh Jacobs B running backs. They just aren't in the first 3 tiers. I mean, you can just swap it out for 1, 2, 3, 4 if you really need to in your head. But yeah, all of these guys kind of had different stories this season. Kyren, it was continued what we saw last year. We were worried, is he going to be a punt returner, right? We had some people on Twitter freaking out. Now, do not touch. He's not going to be a punt returner. Jonathan Taylor, disappointing a little bit for the beginning of the year. But if you had him in the fantasy playoffs, he carried you to a championship. Josh Jacobs, phenomenal over the back half of the season. I just talked about Achane from week 7 to 17. In that same stretch, Josh Jacobs averaging 21 fantasy points per game. Chase Brown, one of the steals of the fantasy football season, feels like he cemented, and as you can tell by our rankings, we're assuming he cemented himself as the starting running back moving forward for Cincinnati. Ken Walker had a pretty good stretch. James Cook scoring the touchdowns he did, and then Bucky coming out, another surprise. So Ty, which running back, I guess, I'm trying to figure out how I want to phrase this to you, because I just want you to let you talk about, just pick a running back. There you go. That's what I'm just going to say. I'm just going to say pick a running back you want to talk about, and you just think that people need to know a little more about from this B tier.
Man, this is just a good list to choose from. Let's be honest. I will go like 30-second synopsis about every one of them because I can't choose one.
Okay.
Let's start with Bucky Irving, right? Bucky Irving, phenomenal rookie year. He's likely going to be the 1A back with Rachaad White in that Tampa backfield. The problem that I run into is size concerns can lead to injuries and all those different kinds of things. That's just a reality with Bucky Irving. But when he's healthy, like he was this year, he is going to be a very, very good dynasty piece to have. James Cook, as long as he is attached to Josh Allen in this Buffalo offense, he's going to continue to produce, right? Yep. Ken Walker is kind of the wild card for me here because Ryan Grubb is no longer in Seattle. So whoever the new play caller is, we could see a little bit of a more split backfield between him and Zach Charbonnet because Ryan Grubb And Mike McDonald had said earlier this year, before the season started, that he was a 3-down back.
Yeah.
That new play caller that comes in may not see it the same way. So he's kind of the wild card here. Chase Brown, like you said, I'll keep this one short and sweet. He is going to be the guy in Cincinnati moving forward. Like, with how well he played once Zach Moss was injured for the year, there's no way you can take any work away from Chase Brown. Obviously, you don't want him going 100% of snaps the entire game, but you have to get him touches because of how good it was. Josh Jacobs in this Green Bay offense, if they continue to score, Josh Jacobs is going to continue to produce in fantasy. He looked good too this year. It was a little bit of a different juice that we had seen in Vegas. I think it was because just better offense, better system, better offensive line, all of those things. Jonathan Taylor was my runner-up for like wild card because we have no idea what this Indy offense is going to be like next year, right? Like, how much of a step does Anthony Richardson take? Jonathan Taylor, has all the talent in the world. It's just a matter of like, are they going to give him the high-value touches? When you're giving him 29, 32, and 34 carries a game, he's going to be rock solid. But is he going to continue getting those high-value touches and get some breakaway runs? Right. Then Kyren Williams, you have to think that moving forward with Blake Corum, I don't want to say it's not going to be the Kyren Williams show in LA, but I'm not going to be surprised if they look to try to get Blake Corum more involved moving forward. That being said, though, Kyren Williams, I think, is the most proven back, and I think Sean McVay is going to trust him more, at least for next year. So I think you've got like another year window with Kyren.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, Kyren just 316 carries last year. So it's, it feels like even if Blake Corum really does cut into that, we're still going to probably see 225 to 250 carries. Probably still going to belong in this tier, just might not be the top of this tier anymore. The only thing I want to add on Cook and Kenneth Walker, both on the last year of their rookie deals, James Cook feels like he's going to get that for sure, that extension in Buffalo. Ken Walker, I do think, is a little more interesting because, like you said, new offensive coordinator coming in. He only ran for 3.7 yards per carry this year. And they have Zach Charbonnet on a similar deal that they have Ken Walker on, but he's 2 years younger. So it'll be just kind of interesting how they navigate that, because I don't think they're going to want to pay up to keep Ken Walker in Seattle. Josh Jacobs as well. We can what was I going to say? Josh Jacobs, the only real scary thing about him is that he's essentially on like 1-year deals moving forward, that they can cut him at any time. But he made me eat my words this year. The way he looked, right? You can't argue with them keeping him around, right? They're not going to cut him probably for the next couple of years with the way that he looked this season. Did you got anything you wanted to add?
This is the tier where I also believe like offensive lines matter a little bit, right? Like Tampa's offensive line improved this year under Liam Cohen. If Liam Cohen leaves, if Liam Cohen leaves, things can be a little different than for Tampa. Buffalo's offensive line, I think James Cook is probably the least affected by his offensive line.
Yeah.
Maybe Chase Brown too, just because of the quarterbacks that they play with and the systems that they're in. But like Ken Walker struggled on the ground this year because of the offensive line, right? Josh Jacobs succeeded because of his offensive line. Kyren Williams, that offensive line was pretty inconsistent, and you kind of saw that with Kyren this year, right? Yeah. So this B tier is really the start of like where you need to start looking at offensive lines as a whole and saying good unit, bad unit, somewhere in between. And you can apply that for the next 3 tiers that we're going to go through.
Yeah, I think too, just touchdowns are a huge thing for a lot of these guys. Kyren, Josh Jacobs, James Cook, all 14 plus touchdowns. They have a year next year where they have 9 or 10, right? All of a sudden you're feeling them more in kind of that Aaron Jones, James Conner range, which are still good running backs, right? But you're not looking at them as 6 through 8 in redraft formats for PPR. All right, moving on to the C tier. This is our last tier before we get the D tier. I gotta say is ginormous. Yeah. I think we have, I want to say 12 players in that tier. I tried to figure out how to, change it up a little, but it's just kind of a big, disgusting tier. This tier we can pretty much, except for Pacheco, it's the old guys.
Yeah.
It's the old head running backs. It's Joe Mixon, Pacheco, like I said, Christian McCaffery, Kamara, Derrick Henry, and David Montgomery. And it was kind of a mixed bag from all these guys this season, right? Joe Mixon was phenomenal up until the last 4 weeks of the season. Pacheco with the injury, CMC obviously with an injury. Kamara, his offense was terrible. I mean, just brutal. And yet he still averaged 19 points per game. Derrick Henry on one of the best offenses in the league looked awesome, 19.8, but he is 31. And then David Montgomery, who has been really just a picture of consistency as a fantasy running back through his time in Detroit. I want to start with Christian McCaffrey because that's the name that everybody wants to talk about in here. And I don't blame them because I have Christian McCaffrey in a dynasty league and I don't know what to do, Ty. The contract says he's around next season, right? He's a $10 million cap hit, whether they keep him or cut him. So he's not moving. In 2026, he's at $11 million cap hit. They save $6 million if they cut him. So they could move off depending on how he looks. But how much should we trust Christian McCaffrey next season? Like, should I be trading for? I guess that's the way. Would you trade for Christian McCaffrey right now?
I don't know if I would trade for McCaffrey. If I have McCaffrey, I'm looking to sell. Because to me, there is so much unknown moving into the next 3 years, right? The potential out in his contract after next year, that's kind of a big deal. Now, Christian McCaffrey is an elite talent that you don't think that he's going to, part ways with San Francisco. But then at that point, we're hitting 30 and 31 years old, right? And with his injury history, there's even more volatility. There's even more variability, whatever buzzword you want to use. To me, I'm going to try to get out while I can, right? When the value is somewhat still there, you may need, I think the other tough part about this is that we are coming off the year with an injury, right? You may need to hold him until the middle of the season of next year, right? When he has played and he started to produce to move on from him, because I think a lot of people share that same sentiment of like, they just don't know what to expect from McCaffrey right at this point. But I think in general, I would be looking to move him because in my heart of hearts, I can't deal with the unknown of Christian McCaffrey for the next year and so on.
So let's say you're a middling team, right? You finished 5-5. You could maybe, win next year, maybe not. I'm going to give you just a couple assets. I want you to tell if you'd rather have them or Christian McCaffrey. Middle 2026 first.
Middle 2026 first.
Yep. So we're talking like the 6th pick.
I'd probably, if I'm the team getting McCaffrey, giving up the first, I'd probably get rid of the first and go get McCaffrey.
Okay. Yeah. And I mean, obviously that, if you're doing that, that means you're pushing the chips in.
Yes.
If you're grabbing the first, if you're on a rebuild, get rid of McCaffrey. No reason he should be on your team. Let's go Jalen Waddle or Christian McCaffrey.
Man, I'd probably keep McCaffrey.
Okay. DK Metcalf.
Oh gosh, that's a weird one now with Grub out.
Yep.
I'd probably want McCaffrey.
DJ Moore.
I would say DJ Moore.
Okay. And then one more name. Let's go with Xavier Worthy or Christian McCaffrey.
I would say McCaffrey.
Okay. So you can kind of see where Ty has landed in there. They're all worth the conversation. If you're the McCaffrey, like for me, it'd feel gross giving up McCaffrey, knowing what he can be. But at the same time, like you said, so many question marks. Kamara and Derrick Henry, let's have that conversation, right? Kamara's going to be 30 next year. Derrick Henry will be 31 at the start of next season. The contracts are different. Henry's got 1 year left on this contract. Will be a 32-year-old free agent at the end of next year. Kamara, most likely will be a Saint through the end of 2027 with the way that they set up that contract. They could save maybe $3 million cutting him in 2027, but they're still going to be paying, I think, $6 million out. So between those two, who do you like more? And is it time to do you think that we're going to see the decline from either of them? Or are you willing to kind of ride it out with both of them moving forward?
I would be willing to ride it out with Derrick Henry more than I would with Alvin Kamara, just because of the offenses, right? Yeah. When you're attached to Lamar Jackson, your offense is going to be good and you're going to be in scoring positions. For Kamara, it's interesting because obviously new head coach is on the way. They do have a quarterback contract situation where they have an out in Derek Carr's contract, but they are then eating almost $50 million in dead cap. So
yeah, it's an out.
right, exactly. So I think it's safe to say that Derek Carr will still be the Saints quarterback in 2025. Not the end of the world because of Kamara's skill set.
Honestly, might it benefit him more than having a good quarterback?
Honestly, like Spencer Rattler, we've seen how that goes, right? I think in the weirdest way, it comes down to a coaching staff again, right? Like you have to think that whoever comes in as the new play caller is going to say, we're going to try to get Kamara the ball in space instead of trying to run it between the tackles.
Yeah.
Right. If they try to run it between the tackles, that offensive coordinator should be fired on the spot because that's not what Kamara does. Right. So again, when it comes down to both of these guys, I'm definitely more pro Derrick Henry. I'm going to ride it out as long as I can with Derrick Henry. I don't care if there's going to be a decline. He's going to be a goal line back if the efficiency isn't there.
For sure. Yeah, I think for sure you got to keep Henry. Kamara, I still believe in as well. Kamara is a sneaky guy. I'd maybe, try to buy in on this season, knowing you got 2 years left.
Yeah, like you're a piece away.
Yes, and just because it's going to be gross, right? Nobody wants, like, if you're a middling team or even if you're rebuilding for sure, or even a middle team, you're like, I don't really want this guy on my team. So he's a guy I'd probably go look to try and acquire. The other three in this tier, David Montgomery, I'm not going to spend much time on him just because he is going to be the same guy next year. That they use him, that's how they want to use him. Obviously, Ben Johnson going away will be a little bit different, but I think the team and Dan Campbell and even Jahmyr Gibbs have really embraced the Sonic and Knuckles two-player punch. They're going to continue to use him. I'll give you a little bit of time in a sec on Pacheco, just because I know, he's got a soft spot in your heart, but he's going to be the Chiefs lead running back next year, right? What we saw before he got injured, what we saw last season, I think we can kind of continue to predict will be the same. He's 25 years old. Joe Mixon's another interesting one. Very good beginning of the season, fell off at the end. A lot of that really had to do with the way that he was being used, just at the end of the season, only 12, 14, 9 carries. Does play Miami, Kansas City, and Baltimore in those games, and then only played 18% of snaps against Tennessee. Do you think you can trust Joe Mixon as a top, I'm going to say, 15 running back next year? Or do you think we're kind of seeing the beginning of the end for Joe?
I feel like it's safe to say that we're starting to see the end. I think there is a way to kind of salvage him, though, a little bit, and that is by giving him a much better offensive line. Because to be completely honest, what he was doing at the beginning of the year, knowing what that offensive line was like, is really impressive. I think if you retool the offensive line, I think there is some hope then for Joe Mixon. And maybe in the weirdest way, too, it might depend on what happens with Stephon Diggs. If Diggs leaves, I start to feel a little more comfortable with Mixon because that's a sign to me, at least, that the team wants to keep Mixon involved and that they're going to give him touches. If they bring back Diggs, I mean, we do need to. Yeah, the tank injury stinks.
Yeah.
So maybe they do have to bring back Diggs.
Yeah, just to have somebody other than Nico.
Oh, so let me answer it from the very beginning. Okay. Scratch what I had just said. I think we are starting to see the end for Joe Mixon. I think next year he is going to be right around. He's going to finish in the teens. I don't know if we're going to see top 10 finish. week to week, we may see like 1 or 2 top 10 finishes. I don't think it's going to be consistent. It's not going to be what we saw at the beginning of this year by any means.
For sure. And I'm going to give you a little bit of just 30 seconds, just on your soapbox about Isaiah Pacheco. Why should people be in on Isaiah Pacheco, Ty?
Because he is, like you said, the lead back in one of the best offenses in the league, right? When you think about the team going into next year, you're going to have a year 2 Xavier Worthy. You're going to have a year 3 Rashee Rice, who's going to be coming back from his injury. We do need to say probably will be suspended for like the first 4 games of the year.
Yeah.
Right. So there's even more opportunity then for Pacheco early on in the year. Again, attached to Patrick Mahomes. The offensive line, I think, is still a concern for this Kansas City team. But luckily, we are going into an offseason where there are going to be lots of good offensive linemen for Kansas City to look at in the draft, trade, free agency, by any means, right? For a young running back on one of the best offenses in the league, there is still enough reason for me to invest in it. They relied on Pacheco. They have confidence in Pacheco. Going into the year, they said he was going to be a 3-down guy. So I still have enough faith. I'm not scared off by the injury. I think to completely write off Isaiah Pacheco when there really won't be anyone else in that backfield, I think is a little premature.
Yeah, if you remember Tony Pollard breaking his leg, if I remember right, it was a similar-ish injury for Pacheco. And it took Pollard the first 6, 7, 8 weeks of that season to say he really felt like he was getting back right. We just saw 5 weeks from Pacheco. He's going to play through the playoffs. So, if you're looking at his yards per carry and you're seeing 3.9, 2.5, 2.9, 3.0, I wouldn't be too concerned because, first of all, they weren't trying to just give him, a ton of carries before the playoffs started. They understood, hey, we pretty much have this locked up. We don't need Pacheco to go out there and do anything crazy. We'll spare him and Kareem Hunt. They want him ready for the playoffs. They want him then eventually ready for next season. So I agree. I am in on Isaiah Pacheco. Before we get to our last 2 tiers in our giant tier in Tier D, we're going to hear from our friends over at Underdog Fantasy.
Today's podcast episode is brought to you by our friends over at Underdog Fantasy. Now, we love Underdog. It is the easiest place to play best ball formats, and they even have their own form of player props called Pick'em. You can make up to 20 times your money on a single night by correlating props together. 2 picks will triple your money, 3 will 6 times it, 4 will 10 times it, and 5 plays that all hit will multiply your entry by 20. You can even place insurance on your picks too, so if only 4 of your 5 props hit, you still get 10 times your entry. And if you use our code FELLAS when signing up, Underdog is going to double your first deposit up to $100.
We are back, and if you're with us over on the YouTube, you can see that this tier is ginormous. We got 12 players in here. Chuba Hubbard, Tyrone Tracy, Brian Robinson, DeAndre Swift, Ramondre Stevenson, Travis Etienne, Trey Benson, J.K. Dobbins, Jonathan Brooks, James Conner, Tony Pollard, Aaron Jones. What this tier really is your low-end running back 2s, high-end running back 3s, and then some old guys, right? That's kind of all of them will kind of fit into that for probably this year and probably the year after that. We can just kind of go through a couple here. I'm just going to kind of highlight some. Chuba Hubbard, Jonathan Brooks, we can talk about together. I feel like Chuba's definitely higher. If Jonathan Brooks isn't playing 2025, I'm way more in on Chuba. It's just we don't know when he's coming back for sure. It's going to be later in 2025, just because of the timing, the fact that it was his second ACL, I think on the same leg, right?
I will confirm that.
Which is just gross. But the fact that he's going to be there, the fact they used a high draft pick, they're going to want to get him out there. We know that Jonathan Brooks is extremely talented. But what we saw from Chuba this year, you can at least expect for most of the season next year. His Ty looks up our medical diagnosis.
It was the same knee.
Yeah, same knee. So probably I would assume a little bit longer of a recovery, but I guess I have no idea. Maybe it's quicker than your second time around. But I would assume they're for sure going to play it safe. So it does. I would assume if they're out of playoff contention and he's targeting like that week 12, 13 return, they probably just hold him out all of 2025. But even then, it really feels like Chuba is more of a 1-year guy as a lead back, and then at least in a timeshare moving forward. Same with Jonathan Brooks, which kind of puts him in this D tier for me. The older guys in this tier, right? We got James Conner, Tony Pollard, Aaron Jones. What separates those three from the? I mean, other than, I shouldn't say that because I was going to say what separates them from the Joe Mixons, Derrick Henrys, and Alvin Kamara's, but obviously it was the amount of fantasy points they scored. But do you think the cliff is much more imminent for these three as well? Is that why we're moving them down too? Or do you think that it's going to be similar to what we're talking about with like Joe Mixon?
I think what it comes down to, because they're not that dissimilar in terms of age and where the cliff is compared to the guys in the C tier. But what I think it comes down to is that we don't see those guys as necessarily elite talents like Alvin Kamara, McCaffrey, Derrick Henry are, right? Yeah. So, yes, again, we are approaching the same cliff from an age perspective, but because they are not of that elite kind of athletic score, whatever you want to call it, athleticism, perception, whatever you want to call it, that's what puts them below, or it puts them in the D tier. I know that Tony Pollard is still he's going to go into year 2 of his contract in Tennessee. I think the reason for Pollard being down here is because we also like his teammate Tyjae Spears a little bit too, that we think based on what we had seen at the end of the year, Spears is going to get a little bit more next year in Tennessee. James Conner re-upped his deal in Arizona. So you're probably going to get another year or 2, but I don't think it's going to be anywhere near where Derrick Henry, Alvin Kamara can get you in a year. Aaron Jones is a fascinating one because if he goes back to Minnesota, I think you then have an argument. Yeah. So there is an argument to put him up into that C tier because, again, of the offense that he would be in. I think you and I think are expecting that Aaron Jones is not going to return to Minnesota. He's going to go elsewhere, and that elsewhere is probably going to be a split backfield.
Yeah, and it's just even in Minnesota, only 7 touchdowns this season. So it'd be interesting, if he does.
Can't run the ball in the red zone, and it's the most frustrating thing.
It is. It definitely is. And so that would be, kind of a crutch. James Conner, also interesting. His teammate, Trey Benson's in here. Benson is a guy pretty much fully projection. We saw a couple little flashes. We saw some low lights from him this season, both running the ball, a little bit in pass protection. So that also, I think, keeps Conner, like you said, similar to Pollard, down a little bit. Is you got these young guys coming up as well. How much does that change for, James Conner of moving from 240 carries? Does he move closer to that 180 to 200 mark as Trey Benson starts to get more involved in this offense as well?
You have to think, right? Yeah. I mean, there's not the reason why they took Trey Benson in the 3rd round last year was to be kind of the successor to James Conner, right? You do have to gradually start working him in. Now, the thing is, I think a lot of people expected that to happen this year. Trey Benson, I think, is a little, I don't want to say he's underdeveloped, but I think the road to Trey Benson becoming that lead back in Arizona is going to be a little bit longer than people expected. So, like you said, kind of that like 200 carry mark, I think is going to be perfect for James Conner, where this year, again, because he was the guy, Trey Benson's going to be a little more involved next year, not overtaking, but we're certainly getting, the journey to the emergence of Trey Benson, I think is on the way.
Yeah, and I think too the offenses they're in is a big question mark as well, right? What does Arizona look like? What does Tennessee look like? Aaron Jones, where does he go? The next kind of batch of guys in this tier: Brian Robinson, DeAndre Swift, Ramondre Stevenson, Tyrone Tracy. I'm going to throw all those 4 kind of in similar situations. Washington, obviously, the best team by far out of this, but Brian Robinson sharing with Austin Eckler. The other 3, Tracy, Swift, Ramondre, not extremely talented guys, right? We're not looking at them going, ooh, they're going to break out. and they're not on great offenses, right? There, I'm 3 of the top. I guess I don't remember what Chicago's pick is. I think top 10 picks.
They're the number 10 pick.
Yep, 3 of the top 10 picks in the NFL draft. These teams have three of the top 10 worst records. That's the way I should put it. Is there any chance that we see one of these 3 moving up to, or one of these 4, Tracy, Ryan Robinson, DeAndre Swift, Ramondre, moving up to the next year? Or do you kind of feel confident that this is just where they're at and this is who they are? And if anything, they're going to move down? Because I think that's where I'm at with all 4 of them.
Yeah, I think they're going to be stuck here. I think if I had to choose one that has potential to go down a tier, probably Brian Robinson.
Yeah.
That doesn't feel right, though, because they have Austin Eckler. Because in my mind, I'm like, Washington could take a running back in this draft. But I think they stay here. I think that's the best way to say it. Yeah. Each one of them has a reason to go down to that E tier, some for whatever reason next year. But for right now, I think they're just going to be stuck in this D tier.
Yeah. I mean, they're low end running back 2s, high end running back 3s for fantasy football. That's just kind of where they are. We saw Ramondre, Swift kind of have, actually Brian Robinson's had like peak years, where like everything goes right. They get a bunch of touchdowns. They're really involved in the receiving game. But it feels like unless you have an anomaly year, this is pretty much where they're stuck at. And the last guy in this tier, actually last 2, we'll talk about J.K. Dobbins first because he is a free agent. You brought him up earlier. Is there anywhere he could go where you'd be more excited than him in Los Angeles, or is it kind of a little bit downhill if he's not a Charger next year?
I really think it gets as good as it gets in LA.
That's what I think.
I mean, just looking at teams that could use a running back like a J.K. Dobbins. I mean, like the Giants.
Yeah.
But that's not great.
Yeah.
Cowboys, maybe the Cowboys, but
yeah,
I think they have offensive line problems. I would still trust the Chargers on that one. Then you're looking at the Browns, like with Nick Chubb. I don't know how I feel about that. Like, I really do think it gets as good as it gets with the Chargers. So he might be one as a J.K. Dobbins manager. I might move him before free agency hits.
Yeah,
because there has been no rumblings on whether yes, the Chargers are in the playoffs, so they're not going to leak free agency news or anything like that. But on the chance that J.K. Dobbins does not return to the Chargers, your value is going to take a hit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's the thing too of even if he does, Gus Edwards and Kamani Vidal are probably not the backups next year.
No.
Right? They're probably going to bring in somebody who's a little more capable at the running back position because Dobbins has never stayed healthy, right? You cannot trust him to play 17 games. I wish you could. I want to see J.K. Dobbins play a full healthy. I want that almost more than anything else in football world. But you can't. And so you got to imagine they bring in someone else. So this year it's probably peak J.K. Dobbins, unless, he really is still coming back from the injuries. We're going to see him more explosive. It just doesn't really feel like any more explosions going to come out of an Achilles and ACL tear back-to-back years for Dobbins. And the last guy I want to talk about in this tier, Travis Etienne. Ty, what the heck do we make of Travis Etienne? A top 7 running back. He was in this B tier for sure last season, maybe even the A tier. We were seeing crazy volume. We had seen efficiency, a couple of years ago in the run game. Receiving game was great. Tank Bigsby wasn't supposed to be much of a problem. And this year, he's averaged 8.7 PPR points per game. They're running back 35. Why do we have him in this tier, Tyler?
Because it's Jacksonville. I think the other part of it, too, is that he is going to be 26. And after next year, he'll be 27 years old as a free agent. Yeah. So not the most attractive prospect, you could say, for another team to go out and sign him. I think, if anything, he returns to Jacksonville. And at that point, at this point, you're then looking at like who's going to be the next play caller. And Jacksonville does not instill me with a ton of confidence because you kept Trent Baalke for whatever reason you did. So Travis Etienne stock might be the lowest of these running backs, to be completely honest. And he might be somebody I might just take away. I like just take a flyer on, right? Like if someone's willing to take like late 26 second or something, I might just see, just why not? Because you have nothing to lose at this point.
Yeah. It's just it was just such a weird year for Jacksonville as a whole. For everyone not named Brian Thomas, really is just kind of the best way to describe how that season went. But yeah, I'm gonna be really interested in just training camp buzz coming out, who their coach is, right? If Ben Johnson decides he wants the Jacksonville job, all of a sudden, right, you're fully back in, you're excited about everything going on. If it's a defensive head coach, maybe a little bit different. So yeah, I agree. I think I'd take a flyer, but it'd have to be pretty cheap. As far as selling ETN, unless someone's going to really pay up, like, if they're paying me a mid or early second, then yeah, I'll probably take it. But other than that, I think I'm just going to hold on to ETN. And then we have our last 6 running backs for our top 36. Najee Harris, Rachaad White, Zach Charbonnet, Jalen Warren, Tyjae Spears, and Tank Bigsby. Now, all these guys split backfields. 2 of these guys obviously coming from the same backfield. Najee Harris, an unrestricted free agent this season. And Jalen Warren, a restricted free agent. For Najee, it kind of feels like his time in Pittsburgh is done. They opted against, the 5th-year option. They've, been using Jalen Warren for the last couple of years. Do you think he moves on from Pittsburgh? And are there any good landing spots for Najee? Or are we kind of seeing, the days of Najee as a top 24 running back are pretty much behind us?
Can I just pitch this to you?
I would love it.
Najee Harris, Vegas Raider.
It fits.
It fits. Like that's where I'm expecting him to go, because I don't think it's going to be in Pittsburgh. I think they need to revamp the run game a little bit. Like Jalen Warren was kind of a breath of fresh air when he started to get involved in the offense. To me, it feels like they're just going to completely hit a reset on the run game. They're going to bring in, like, the offensive line is very solid, right? They're going to bring in you don't want to repeat a Najee Harris and take another running back in the first round, but this running back draft class is very deep, very, very deep. Mm-hmm. So there are going to be opportunities. Like the other thing is too, can I propose this? If Najee Harris leaves and J.K. Dobbins signs in Pittsburgh, we are all on the gas for J.K. Dobbins then. But that's going to take a lot of things to kind of play out that you can't control. So again, I share the same with you of just, it feels like Najee's going to be on a different team next year. Yeah.
Jalen Warren, honestly, I feel like he is who he is. He will be the same player no matter where he goes, where he is fun in the running game, but he's not going to get more than like 7 or 8 carries a game. I'll probably see 3 or 4 receptions a game. He'll be a guy that you can plug into your flex whenever you need. It depends, even if Pittsburgh re-signs him or not. The other 4 are interesting, right? Because Rachaad White, like you said, he's kind of like a 1B. Is he going to be the 2, like a clear 2 next season in Tampa Bay? Do you still have faith in Rachaad White, or are you kind of, this was his last hurrah?
I wouldn't say it was his last hurrah. I just think we know what he's going to be now moving forward. He's going to be the receiving threat in that backfield, which there's some value to. And he is going to have some contingent upside, if Bucky goes down, because this offense has gone through Rachaad White before. Like, we've seen him get 200 plus carries, so we know that he's capable of doing it. So I wouldn't say it's, end stretch or home stretch for Rachaad White by any means. I just think when Bucky is active, we have a very, very capped ceiling with Rachaad White.
Yep. No, I would agree. Tank Bigsby, Tyjae Spears, and Zach Charbonnet are all very interesting running backs, because it's what is the ceiling for these 3? It feels like at this point, Tank has the best opportunity, I want to say, to be the lead back next year, just because there's so many questions around Travis Etienne. I'm not saying he's the best back of the three. I personally think Charbonnet is,
Mhm.
but I think having Ken Walker there, I don't think he has a clear path to be there. If we were going to try to predict the future into next year and go, where do I think these three guys fall? Which tiers do you think these guys are going to move up into as we look into Dynasty next season?
I think Charbonnet and Tank are going to be in this bottom tier still. I think Tyjae Spears can be in the D tier.
All right.
Because I still go back to the preseason when they're like, yeah, we're going to be 50-50. That's not how it played out this year. It was very much Tony Pollard. And that might have been just because they trusted Pollard more.
Mm-hmm.
But Tyjae Spears towards the end of the year started to show that, no, you can trust me too, right? You can give me some touches. So I would not be surprised, again, with Tony Pollard getting a year older, not as much tread on his tires compared to other 26, 27-year-old running backs. But I feel like Tyjae Spears has the clearest opportunity, like you said, to be more involved next year.
Yep. Yeah, I think for me, I like Charbonnet just because it would be interesting for me if they keep Ken Walker after this season, what they decide to do with that situation. Tank Bigsby had the most rush attempts, most rush yards this season, but was not used in the passing game at all. That's really the ceiling for him of maybe they move ETN after this year. Maybe he becomes a J.K. Dobbins.
He's a Brian Robinson on a worse offense.
There it is. Yep, that's the guy I'm looking at. Right. So that's really what the ceiling is for Tank Bigsby there.
Yeah, not from a skill set perspective, but from just a fantasy asset perspective.
Yes, 100%. All right, that wraps up our top 36 Dynasty running backs. We hope that you enjoyed. We hope that you come back then next week for wide receivers and tight ends. We hope that our predictions are right. Skull our Vikings. Send us a message on a Tuesday morning, Monday night if the Vikings put up another stinker like they did last Sunday, because we will be going through all of the feels. That is for sure. Hopefully you want to subscribe, turn on those notifications to our YouTube channel. If you're on the audio podcast, we love you over there as well. I'm at Camel FFF on the X. Tyler's at Tyler_Plath. We are the FFLs on Instagram, FFLs on Twitter, and Fantasy Football Fellas on TikTok, Facebook, YouTube, and Fantasy Football Fellas Shorts on YouTube. So make sure you follow all those for all of our content, because it does not sleep, and neither do we apparently. But we will see you guys after Wildcard Weekend. Deuces.